gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Couch. She's from the National Cancer Institute's AI Working Group, which identifies and prioritises cancer research areas that can most benefit from AI methods. She works with colleagues across the NIH and other parts of the US government and international groups, industry and academia to coordinate efforts and build programs at the intersection of biomedical research and AI. This work includes developing and adapting new methods, creating training opportunities, and identifying and addressing ethical issues. Dr. Couch's brand, the NCI and NIH supports research development of enabling technologies and methodologies for structural biology, biophysical characterization, bioinformatics, computational biology, mathematical modeling, data science, citizen science, and crowdsourcing methods, and others. So please, I guess, pay attention, and Jennifer will give us her presentation now. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Chalmers, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me here tonight or this morning. I'm really happy to be here with you all here in the rather convenient virtual space, although I'd love to be there with you all. I'm from the other NCI, as was introduced earlier. That's the National Cancer Institute, which is one of the 27 institutes and centers from the National Institutes of Health in the US. And that means we're the largest funder of cancer research in the world. And so that means a whole heck of a lot of cancer AI. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. No, wrong screen again. No, you guys are seeing the right screen, right?
That's the correct screen, yes.
Okay, good. Second time's a charm. All right. So I want to talk you through here in the next 50 minutes or so how the National Cancer Institute views AI and cancer research, highlight some of our programs and some of our individual projects, and maybe touch on some of the big challenges and opportunities for artificial intelligence in cancer. I'll talk a little bit about upcoming projects, including some plans for what we're calling an AI Accelerator, and then touch on how all this impacts and is impacted by things like training, inclusivity, ethics. And I'll show just a little bit about policy. There's a whole lot more about policy, but if you want to read up on that, I'll give you some links. Cancer AI is an extremely fast-moving space. And so that policy space and the scientific opportunities are changing really, really rapidly. So I know this audience is familiar with diagrams like this, but just to kind of put us all on the same page and let you know where I'm coming from. The term artificial intelligence for us is the big umbrella term here. It's the term for computational techniques that enable machines to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. And machine learning is a subset of AI that uses statistical methods that can learn and improve from experience. Deep learning is a subset of machine learning that filters the data through a lot of layers to predict and classify information. And most deep learning methods use neural network architectures. And so we often refer to deep neural networks. And then there's this other big space within AI, which is natural language processing, which has also been used in cancer for a long time. It includes things like speech recognition and natural language understanding and language generation, and also these things that have got a lot of press lately, large language models. So that's things like ChatGPT and its friends, right? This is the part of natural language processing that uses deep learning in generating and understanding language. So artificial intelligence and machine learning are not new in cancer. We've seen them for a long time, but recent advances have really converged to accelerate activity in this area across biomedical research and specifically in cancer. And those are really the convergence of the development of new methods in deep learning and large language models primarily, but also improvements in things like hardware and greater access to cloud computing, right? So the ability to do these large models, and then increasing access to large volumes of health data and biological data. So both data coming from the lab, the clinic, and sort of this real world data. So why do we see so much AI in cancer research specifically? I think partly the answer is that cancer is complicated, and cancer researchers are often early adopters of new tools and technologies and methods, both to build things like clinical decision models, but also to understand the fundamental biology that underlies health and disease. And I've put this slide in here to remind me to say that cancer research supported by the NCI crosses this whole spectrum of areas, not just clinical research, but fundamental technology development, basic biology, data science, as well as clinical translational prevention, therapy development, behavioral research, the impact of the environment on health and disease, and the ethical context around all of that. So the mission statement for the NCI is there at the bottom, and you can see it's pretty broad. And I've inserted that bit where it says across the nation and the world, because we fund grants all across the world. So we know that AI is out there and in widespread use, and it's in decision support tools, it's in the clinic, it's in the lab, and it's being used to make predictions about outcomes and help guide the decision and design of new therapies and therapy choices, for example. And now we're seeing increasingly more things like this, where AI is approved by the Food and Drug Administration to be used with things like devices in the clinic to make decisions. So there's a huge range of cancer AI communities out there that have important insights and contributions. And we, the NCI, we've run a lot of workshops across the last couple of years around this space to kind of get our heads around where the opportunities and the challenges are. NCI sponsors workshops in all sorts of areas, and this is no different. AI is across all these areas. So I'll describe some of these in more detail, but you can see they cover a big range of areas, including really highly focused areas like AI in radiology or biology. Some of them are much more methodological, like interpretable deep learning. And then some workshops around things like ethics, and then some of these things that I'll describe later on that we call innovation labs or ideas labs, where we bring people together from different disciplines with the idea of building new collaborations. And I felt like I had to put in a ChatGPT thing here because it's everywhere. And, you know, so even the font of all wisdom at the moment thinks that cancer AI is generally a good idea here and can do a lot. And what's kind of interesting here, right, is that this is ChatGPT version 3 here. And even having been trained when it was a few years ago, it's actually fairly insightful about where cancer AI is now. So AI in cancer is growing rapidly, and it's not just in one area. It's growing across the cancer research spectrum, from understanding basic biological mechanisms up through diagnosis, treatment and development, and outcome prediction, and the implementation into the clinic. And what you're seeing here is a graph of NCI funded grants that contain the term machine learning or deep learning or artificial intelligence in the title. We didn't do the same graph for natural language processing or large language models, because those are specifically the large language models are showing up here in later years. These are mostly supported through, you can see this huge increase in the last few years. These are mostly supported through what we call investigator-initiated research, which is the bulk of what we support, but also through some of our big programs like the Quantitative Imaging Network, Cancer Systems Biology, Physical Sciences and Oncology, and then some of our tool building programs. And you can see that AI is typically not used by itself in these applications. It's used with other software or other computational methods to deal with topics across biology and diagnosis and treatment and epidemiology. There's also a fair bit of natural language processing being used to extract features from things like clinical notes and pathology reports, and using AI methods to get things out of electronic health records to predict disease response, likelihood of recurrence and survival, et cetera. And there's emerging applications in several other spaces, including areas like drug development, drug response prediction, radiotherapy planning, biomarker development, and importantly, I think, at least from my perspective, advancing mechanistic understanding of the sort of underlying biological mechanisms behind cancer. So the NCI supports AI through a number of different programs, but the one program that has been heavily impacted in recent years here is our Informatics Technology for Cancer Research program that supports informatics tool development throughout the life cycle of tool development, from very early methods and algorithm development with small grants up through larger grants for prototyping and further development, and then hardening, enhancement, dissemination, right? Because as these tools sort of move out of the single lab setting and into broader and broader use, the need to sort of enhance and harden and disseminate those tools becomes increasingly challenging and expensive. And there's even an opportunity that we call sustainment for those rare tools that become in very broad, widespread use throughout the cancer research community. And about half of these applications these days are involve some form of AI. So a big challenge for us at the NCI is how to keep track of AI. It's everywhere. NCI is a very big organization. We support research across this huge spectrum, and we divide up that research sort of based on like the biological scales, right? So biology, clinical, prevention, translation, epidemiology, that sort of thing. And so AI cross-cuts all of those areas. And so in order to kind of keep track of the whole field of AI across the NCI, we formed the Trans-NCI Artificial Intelligence Working Group with the goal of assessing our current investments in AI, providing some recommendations to senior leadership, organizing kind of topical workshops, and I'll show a couple of those here in a minute, and then acting as a sort of a point of contact or coordination for AI activities across the Institute, but also across the Cancer Institute with other institutes of the National Institutes of Health, you know, heart and translational research and bioengineering and things like that. And then a point of coordination and communication with external activities with the other agencies, for example, and other international organizations. And one of the first things that we did was try to do a comprehensive look at what NCI was supporting in Cancer AI. And that graph I showed you earlier, sort of the climbing grant applications, was part of that assessment. But we tried to get a handle on what was in that large number of grants and where the field was going. And this resulted in an internal report that contributed to this publication that you can see here by our former NCI director, Ned Sharpless at the time, and Tony Krlavich, who's the director of the Center for Bioinformatics and Information Technology at the NCI, which supports kind of our centralized IT resources. So the key points in that report, and I'll come back to the coordinated effort part of this that's at the top later when I talk about the accelerator. But some of the key points here was that we could do a much better job of leveraging ongoing activities at NCI. We support AI in all sorts of formats, in all sorts of grant programs, but there's not a whole lot of coordination across those programs at the level of the AI methodology. We need to create effective partnerships with other institutes, agencies, and industry. We need better data sets. So every time we have a meeting about AI, the AI specialists want more data, better data, AI-ready data, gold standard data. That isn't always possible. And so we also need to make better use of the data that we have. How can we enhance existing data sets when possible, deal with the labeling problems, that sort of thing. We need to explore and adapt emerging AI methods that are used in other fields that can be imported into cancer research. You know, there are methodologies, for example, used in fields like astronomy that come into the cancer research space because finding a cancer cell in a sea of other cells that look almost identical to them is a similar sort of methodological problem to finding, you know, galaxies and seas of other galaxies and that sort of thing. We need to support a range of training and outreach opportunities to diversify and expand AI capabilities across the cancer research spectrum. And we need to provide support for focused efforts on ethical, legal, and social implications for effective and responsible use of AI in cancer research. So some of the challenges to applying AI in cancer specifically, there's a lot of use of industry platforms and tools out there by cancer researchers. Often those tools and platforms were not developed specifically for biomedical data or cancer data. And so they need to be adapted or integrated in different ways. And interpretability of artificial intelligence models is important to build trust in their application, trust for clinicians and patients, and trust for biologists. And the logic underlying those models, trying to get at the mechanisms that they identify and discern biological insights, for example. And then we need to deal with the data situation, right? Applying AI to cancer research requires methods that can handle longitudinal data. We have some big, long data sets. They are often, full of gaps or holes, or they're incomplete or imperfect in various ways. Cancer data is inherently multimodal. Cancer is a multi-scale problem with data coming in from all sorts of different methods, being collected in all sorts of different formats at all sorts of biological scales. And the data can sometimes be noisy, and there's bias in the data, and there's bias in the way that the data has been collected and applied in some cases. And then there's obviously patient data and privacy issues. So starting to address the data problem, we held a recent workshop on computational approaches to addressing imperfect data. And this was us bringing together a group of Cancer AI researchers to talk about what to do when you can't just generate new data, right? What can we do with the data that we have? And, where are there sort of strategic gaps that we could fill in? But what do we do about, while we wait for the next 30 years to collect the perfect data set, that sort of thing. And so to address some of these challenges, we brought together this set of people here, chaired by Caroline Uhler from MIT and Olivier Gevert from Stanford. And then we organized the workshop into the sessions that you see here. They're organized sort of by biological scale. And we went round and round about how to organize this, right? Because AI methods cut across scales and they cut across data types and everything else. But the most convenient way to organize the talks was around sort of scales. And so that the categories were integrating classical structure prediction with machine learning towards drug discovery and drug identification, and then dealing with the scale of chemical, genetic, and mechanical perturbations, so kind of the molecular level data. And then a session on multimodal learning in data limiting context. So when you get up into that kind of cell and tissue level, we often have limited capabilities to collect really large data sets in some of those areas. And so how can we make the use of the data that we have? And then making use of large scale unstructured clinical research data. And then finally, moving on to improving modeling of real world data and evidence data, real world evidence in clinical trial design and research. So a report is sort of coming out of this and potentially a publication. But the key points I think that were raised in this recent workshop, and I should have mentioned on the previous slide, the link there gives you a link to the recordings for those talks. But the sort of the key points for me, at least, that came up were that cancer models at whatever scale need to handle the multimodal data that's inherent in cancer research. And explainability is really critical in clinical decision models. Again, it's this trust issue. Clinicians don't trust a model that they don't understand. They don't trust a black box. We need to explain the answers in order to trust them. And patients don't trust them with those in that way also. And then there's this enormous amount of interest around generative AI and large language models. Large language models are large, right? But how large do they need to be? And there was a really fascinating discussion around methods to make smaller generative models in strategic ways that weren't so enormously compute intensive. We can't collect all the data that we need. And so how can we incorporate, causality and imputation, and where's the line between imputation and just flat out synthetic data? There's controversy around synthetic data, but there's ways to make synthetic data statistically relevant. And then we talked about having sort of the best of both worlds, combining mechanistic models with data-driven, AI or machine learning models. We talked about methods for dealing with weak labels or unlabeled data. There are strategies emerging out there using some of these language models, for example, to figure out the labels for the unlabeled data or fill in some of the unlabeled, the lack of labeling on some of the data. And then we talked about whether the human in the loop model is always the better model. So a lot of these machine learning models are trained assuming that if you get the answer that the pathologist or the radiologist gets, that's the answer. And is that always correct? You know, there's some interest in looking at things differently and thinking about gold standards a little bit differently. And then detecting and removing and understanding the bias in the data, right? So most data sets have some kind of bias in them, and we need to understand what that is in order to mitigate it. So this paper that was published before the workshop illustrates one powerful approach, which is federated learning. And although machine learning has shown promise across disciplines, the idea of out of sample generalizability is really a concern. And so currently the way that that's often addressed is by sharing multi-site data, but centralizing and sharing data across sites when it's sensitive data is a real challenge. And so federated learning provides an alternative paradigm to accurate and generalizable machine learning by sharing just the numerical model updates, not the data itself. And this project is a particularly large federated learning project, involves 71 different sites across 6 continents, so presumably the continent that you're all sitting on now, to generate an automatic tumor boundary detector for glioblastoma. And glioblastoma is a particularly challenging form of cancer because of its inherent heterogeneity. And detecting the subcompartment boundaries is a really critical step in doing that. And so this federated learning model was necessary to use those numbers of sites because the numbers of samples at any given site is small. Okay, so this paper also came up in discussion at the workshop. This one was published just after the workshop, raised by Yuri Leshkovic, one of the authors, and talking about generalist models. So the idea of being able to carry out a diverse set of tasks using little or no task-specific labeled data. So they're built through self-supervision on large, diverse data sets. And you can imagine these generalist models flexibly interpret different combinations of medical modalities, things like images and electronic medical records and omics data, and turn that into, like a spoken form of recommendations. And you can imagine trained on multimodal data, reasoned with multiple knowledge sources, things like literature, clinical notes, knowledge graphs, and adding to that flexible interactions. Imagine something like ChatGPT, right? Leading to chatbots for patients or clinicians, and interactive note-taking, augmented procedures, text to things like molecule design, bedside decision support, that sort of thing. So this is a really rapidly emerging area in the AI field, in the cancer space. So ethics is on everybody's mind with AI, and you'll see later some high-level policies and codes of conduct and things like that that are coming out. But last year, to begin to understand the ethical and social implications of increased AI in medicine and biomedical research, the NIH, so that's the larger organization that includes the National Cancer Institute, held a series of events designed to try and understand the landscape of ethics in AI. And these were open. We had hundreds of people. They were virtual in this series of workshops that we called micro labs. So micro meaning, short, not micro, like as in small numbers. And then what we tried to do was sort of get a handle on, are we even talking to all the relevant stakeholders? So in other words, are there whole categories of people who should be weighing in on this who aren't, right? If we NIH advertise things, who sees the ad? If we tweet, who follows us and that sort of thing. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't missing key stakeholders. And so we spent one entire discussion sort of figuring out what stakeholder communities we should be talking to that we weren't, and brought them in on the later microlabs. And then we spent some time sort of thinking out the different opportunities and challenges. And then we spent the third lab thinking about organizing and understanding the opportunity space. And what that brought us to was kind of a set of themes here that were sort of general themes that came out of the thousands of ideas that were generated in those discussions. And you can see here a whole bunch of themes that we are intending to do things about in in the research space, understanding, for example, the ethical considerations of human AI interaction or teaming, understanding what digital dignity means, thinking about codes of conduct, thinking about how to assess AI products. But the one that was sort of the most popular, and popular here means the most number of people wanted to join a breakout session to talk about it, was the one in the upper left in red, called thinking about AI in biomedical research in a systems way, right? Thinking about it across the entire AI data ecosystem. So how does ethics cross all the flow of the data ecosystem as data and models and everything move through that ecosystem? And so we chose to focus and do a deeper dive on that that particular topic. And so we ran what we call an innovation lab. These are a sort of a much deeper dive with a smaller number of people. We choose about 30 or 35 people from a pool of applicants. In this case, applicants including ethicists, philosophers, sociologists, ethnographers, in addition to researchers, scientists, AI experts, clinicians, and patient advocates. And we had this group of 30 people focus for a week on this topic with the mindset of creating a culture of ethical inquiry as opposed to focusing on kind of regulations or rules. So how can we come at this from an ethical inquiry perspective? And out of this week-long came a number of new collaborative teams that formed from these people that didn't know each other before the lab. From these very different disciplines, forming teams and thinking out pilot projects. And we're following those pilot projects and continuing to build some new initiatives and funding opportunities around that. We've given out supplements and grants and things in this space. So one example of negative consequences of inappropriate application of AI, this is a paper from 2019, so it's, old in the AI space, right? But Ziad Obermeyer and others in this paper found that a commercial risk prediction tool used to identify patients for high-risk management programs was inappropriately using a proxy. It was using medical expenditures as a proxy for illness. And, at least the way our system works, you might think that if you're sicker, you're spending more money on healthcare. However, unequal access to care means that we actually spend less money caring for Black patients. And the authors estimated that the racial bias here reduces the number of Black patients identified for extra care by more than half because of using this proxy. And so I use this as an example of, AI works, but you have to ask the right question of the model. So even really well-designed AI and machine learning can become inaccurate or unreliable over time due to a lot of different factors. Subtle shifts over time can cause degradation of the predictive capability of an algorithm, which can effectively negate the benefit of these types of systems in the clinic. And the goal of this challenge prize competition that was run by our colleagues in the National Center for Accelerating Translational, what does the S stand for? Translational medicine. Ran a challenge prize composition to identify and minimize inadvertent amplification and perturbation of systemic biases in AI/ML algorithms that are used in clinical decision-making tools in the development of predictive and social bias detection and correction tools. So what they were going for here was solutions that detect and mitigate bias in artificial intelligence and machine learning that are used in clinical decisions. And they looked at three kinds of bias: predictive bias, so problems in algorithmic inaccuracies, producing the wrong estimate or differing from the underlying truth, but also social bias, so systemic inequalities in the care and delivery and suboptimal health outcomes for some populations. And then latent bias, social or statistical biases that occur over time due to the complexity of the healthcare process. And they have recently awarded a set of prizes for projects in this area. And I'll just draw your attention to the thing here on the bottom. So they were looking to detect and predict these different kinds of bias, prevent different kinds of bias, and understand it. with the ultimate goal here that I've circled of building trust in the community and among stakeholders. And the issue here is that if we really want diverse data sets, the communities that are going to contribute that data need to trust us to do the right thing with the data. And so one of the rationales behind this challenge was to understand the bias, but also to build trust in the larger community. And so we know that there are large differences in things like access to healthcare and the social and built environment. And social determinants of health remain a really key factor in health outcomes, including cancer. And in this blog post and on the NCI website and our very recent, relatively new national holiday, Juneteenth, this is a blog post from a health disparities researcher that highlights those issues, among others. But one thing that's interesting about Dr. Davis's work is that she combines biology and social determinants of health. And what she's shown is that specific regional ancestries within the African population are important. And this is ancestry versus race, right? So ancestries are important and affect some of the differences that we see in outcomes. So population studies show racial differences in triple negative breast cancer biology, including a higher prevalence of some of the more aggressive types of triple negative breast cancer in African Americans. But those studies and that data have been built on investigations that relied on self-reported race of primarily US populations. And due to all of the heterogeneous genetic admixture and biological consequences of social determinants, it's really difficult to tease the biology out from the social determinants in this complex heterogeneous background that comes under these different racial categories, racial category headings. And so her work goes back to African populations to pull out the biology, and then brings that back together with the social determinants to provide a much more clear picture. From our colleagues in the mental health space, I just wanted to share this program called SHARE, which is a cloud-based platform for population science that includes social determinants of health data sets designed to accelerate research in health disparities and healthcare delivery outcomes and artificial intelligence bias mitigation strategies. And one of the things that they do in their programs, they have what they call these think-a-thons, where they invite groups to participate. Again, this sort of idea of building trust within the communities from which the data comes. So coming soon, I talked a minute ago about innovation labs and ideas labs, right? These collaboration building things. And I've talked about some of these workshop series that we run where we're trying to get our minds around where the opportunities are. And so we're going to do that in this health disparities area. And so tentatively titled Embracing the Complexity, Catalyzing Transdisciplinary Approaches to Accelerate Progress Towards Cancer Health Equity. Maybe we can shrink that down a little bit. But the idea is to build on the research that is out there in cancer health disparities. There's a lot of research in cancer health disparities, but we're wanting to cross those silos of, biology, social determinants, and the various other areas that people have studied parts of this really complicated problem. And we've run a number of listening sessions at big disparities meetings and other gatherings. And what's come out of those listening sessions is that health disparities data has some themes to it, right? There's enormous complexity to the problem. There's knowledge integration issues, and there's difficulties with expanded engagement. Again, the trust issue. And so we want to bring together, again, groups from these different research areas and consider non-traditional research approaches and maybe build some new collaborations. And so we're designing a series of virtual events, which will be coming soon, to articulate some of the key opportunities and challenges in this multidisciplinary space of cancer health disparities and health equity. So I'm going to switch now to this sort of area of the combination of what humans do best and what AI does best, right? And the combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence can be particularly useful. The paper that I'm showing here on the left from Godins, Damisser and group combined an AI model that correctly predicted the difference between metastatic and non-metastatic unlabeled cells, which is a non-trivial thing to do. When humans look at these cells under the microscope, you can't tell the difference. They look the same. And it wasn't obvious why these cells were different. But the model could predict just based on the microscopic images of the cells. And so they took this deep learning model and went back into it, looked for the parameters that were the strongest, and pushed those kind of to an extreme, and then created images using those parameters that had been sort of maxed out, right, made more extreme. And when you create these kind of fake images by using the model in the other direction, what now humans can actually see the difference, right, when the parameters are pushed so far. And what they begin to see is things like blebbing, right, which is little bulges on cells, and brightness around the edges that might indicate things like stiffness changes. And the reason to do this isn't just that it's cool that you can go back and create data, but it's this idea that human beings get these aha moments when we look at data like that. And, now we can look at these cells and go, oh, maybe there's differences in the stiffness, for example, and go back in and investigate the biological underpinnings. And this example, not cancer, but an interesting approach from Alzheimer's. It's a citizen science game called Stall Catchers, which is designed to enable regular people to contribute to the sometimes really arduous task of annotating images from blood vessels in brains where the blood vessels get stalled, right? They in Alzheimer's patients, you see these blockages. And sort of annotating where those blockages are and how many there are is really important to understand Alzheimer's progression. And they've tried over the years to make AI and machine learning models that do better than humans at finding these blockages. And none of the models quite ever do better than human beings. And so, but when you look at, so they ran a challenge prize competition and got a number of really interesting models that came fairly close. And so they did another experiment where they combined those models in the form of bots with humans and sort of made teams of all humans, teams of all bots, teams of humans and bots together. And the combination of bot and human, right? So AI plus human intelligence was actually the best, right? So it beat out the groups of humans, and it beat out the machine learning models themselves. So going back to NCI's strategies for AI and cancer research, we're thinking a lot about how to leverage existing programs. So we support, again, a lot of AI across a lot of different spaces, and some strategic partnerships. How can we increase collaboration through some of these programs that I just described? And how do we develop and maintain an interdisciplinary and collaborative workforce that uses AI effectively to advance cancer research? So we're considering what we're calling an AI accelerator, this idea of leveraging across all these existing AI communities that we already support through a number of other programs, building a community of communities, right, with shared interests and struggles, doing something that is a little bit more nimble and adaptive, and finding a way to provide more agile and rapid support and understanding, right? Something maybe that moves a little faster than our traditional grant mechanisms, and then fostering discussion and building out things like best practices that evolve across fields when people are working on similar methods. And so we've held what we call a visioning meeting around a Cancer AI Accelerator. We brought together a group of cancer AI researchers to sort of envision what an accelerator would be, right? What would be the thing that would do all that stuff that I just said? And so through this visioning meeting, we came up with a set of recommendations, some mission statements, some strategic pillars here that you see here, right? So the mission being, the very small mission of transforming our understanding and treatment of cancer through equitable development and implementation of AI. So, a nice contained mission. And then doing that with these pillars of people, the workforce, right? Data, models, implementation, compute sources, and outreach efforts. And the group also came up with sort of a set of guiding principles. So an accelerator in this space needed to be ethical, focused on the integrity and regulatory and training considerations for appropriate AI use. Needs to be inclusive, and we mean that in every sense of that word, bringing in a lot of varied perspectives to cancer-focused AI. Needs to be dynamic, a little bit more nimble and rapid in identifying and exploring these really rapidly evolving opportunities. Needs to be enabling and empowering. One of the issues that came up really strongly was this need for mentors in this space and leadership opportunities to foster the next generation of cancer AI researchers. And obviously we're cancer focused, and then community driven. So this needs to not be a NCI top-down thing, but rather a community driven, ongoing and community governed sort of activity. And so what we're imagining is the accelerator will have sort of two leads, if you will, right? One from the community and then the other one being us. So we're there for kind of long-term operational leadership from NCI, providing kind of the big picture and the vision. And then we're imagining potentially rotating leadership, steering committees, things like that from the Cancer AI community. People that would serve to, you know, on a rotating basis to provide leadership and scientific insight. And then we are imagining that spawning working groups, you know, in different areas that people are interested in working on around well-defined endpoints and specific goals. And then some of those working groups leading to activities, right? So things like those collaboration building ideas labs or think tanks or, you know, focused workshops or challenge prize compositions, right? These kind of more rapid methods of doing work that will augment our existing grant researcher portfolio. And so the idea is, you know, that out of all of these will come things like promising practices, access and sharing, development of reliable models, models that can be deployed across multiple settings, standards, maybe best practices, and then methods for sharing resources and approaches to be most beneficial to cancer research and patient care. And so where we're headed with all this is a pilot. That's where we always go first, right? A pilot to engage a broader audience through a series of micro labs. And again, micro meaning short period of time, but a lot of people, right? So we will be taking this kind of vision that I just showed you all as a sneak peek here and having a series of open micro labs in the virtual space to discuss it more and build some, you know, gain some additional community input. We'll begin to assemble this kind of lead and steering committee. And we're thinking about areas around pilot activities that might seed the initial groups. And the ones that have come up really strongly, of course, are large language models that everybody's super excited about. And then this idea of mentoring, right? People need mentors. If we're going to build the next generation AI and bring up the next generation of AI researchers or AI cognizant cancer researchers, we need mentoring capabilities. And so NCI supports a lot of training. So this is across the whole spectrum of cancer research. We provide both institutional and individual programs, training programs across all of the cancer research space. And that's run out of the Center for Cancer Training. And it's a really complicated series of sometimes very specific opportunities. Some are more open than others. Some have things like citizenship requirements, some don't. And the Cancer Training Center is seeing more and more of a need to develop programs that support training programs for scientists that are, you know, developing AI expertise, using AI, doing data science, that sort of thing. And they're also experimenting with AI themselves with this chatbot that they've put on the website to help people navigate this kind of complex set of training opportunities.
So I just say that a 5-minute warning, Jennifer.
Perfect, thank you. Voice from out in the ether there. So not all of the training that we sponsor happens through training grants, though. I mentioned earlier the Informatics Technology for Cancer Research program. They have a training network that is a collaborative effort of the researchers in that consortium, trying to support training in data science broadly, and using the tools developed by the investigators in that program, making it easier for researchers to integrate cancer informatics into their workflows and to use those tools. There's a bunch of activities out there like this that support data science training for underserved communities in particular. That one also supports the training of the mentors. There's another area that I just wanted to highlight quickly here, which is that when we think about training, one of the activities that we've been doing more and more is thinking about what we call junior investigators, or JIs. All our big programs, I think, and this is not all of them, this is just a set of them here, but programs like the Cancer Systems Biology Consortium and the Physical Sciences and Oncology Network that have computational modeling as an integral part of them, also have training programs either built into them or adjacent to them. And one of the things that we try to do is bring those junior investigators together, either group by group or in a large meeting like this, with the idea that the late stage graduate students, postdocs, early career faculty, right, people that are kind of just in that early stage of launching their careers, they need to build out this network. It's an inherently interdisciplinary space, and they have a lot of needs that people that work in more traditional scientific fields don't have, because their research is so interdisciplinary. And so we run these junior investigator meetings where they can come and develop skills and build community and build out their networks and their skill sets. One of the sort of interesting high points to those always is this idea of working with the patient advocates. So junior investigators and patient advocates working together create sort of a two-way street of understanding. And the junior investigators in particular, I think, benefit from working with the advocates and understanding kind of contextually how their work fits into a bigger sort of, immediate picture. And they become better at communicating their science in a kind of a real world setting. I think this is particularly important for people like data scientists and AI specialists, right? It's really hard work to explain. And so working with these patient advocates to explain it helps them to build out those skills and gain funding and things like that. Okay, I think in the interest of time here, I'm going to fly through the policy bit here, but suffice it to say, there's a lot coming down the road in the US, and I'm sure this is true everywhere else. It is our intention to align with all of these policy areas around codes of conduct and Bill of Rights, and this executive order that's come out of the White House recently around responsible and trustworthy AI. We have data sharing policies that mean that most of the data that we support is shared, but it's shared in a number of different ways. There are a lot of different resources out there, including these generalist repositories where people can share data that is not maybe as easy to share in some of the bigger repositories. And there is a large national AI initiative, and I'll just kind of go through this all quickly. I just want to highlight the top thing on here. We're developing a set of think tanks around equitable and engaged AI to advance cancer research as a collaboration between the US and the European Union. And I will save the cancer data visualization story for another time, but it's a fun one, and you've got the website there if you want to go and watch a bunch of talks that are conversations between people like game designers and cancer researchers and patient advocates. And I think with that, I will end on questions here.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, for a really interesting talk there. We've got a few questions. Let me put my video on. There we go. We've got a few questions in the Q&A there. The first one's from Tayev Bagrati. That they ask, there was mention of AI and language models with regard to interpreting histopathology reports. Can you explain further what's the emerging front of AI in histopathology?
Can I explain the emerging front of AI and histopathology? Well, so there's been a lot of use of machine learning in that space, right, over the years. And I think, if I'm remembering the one that you're referring to, it was there's some more recent efforts around using these language models to begin to interpret the data that or the metadata that comes along with the histopath data, right? And so this idea of understanding the data in addition to just building sort of more correlative models. I'm hoping that answers that question. But it's a rapidly emerging space. We see a lot of work in the area of histopathology and also radiology.
So there's the second question here from Carlos Riveros. Has the topic of AI can be used to guide, I'm assuming this is policy, not policing, to guide policy and medicine delivery, or estimating the impact of research programs in cancer been considered? If so, can you expand on that? So how is AI used to guide policy and medicine delivery?
Yeah, so AI as a guide rather than policy about AI. So I think we're seeing it coming into understanding. So in some of those bias discussions, right, we're seeing it coming in as a way to understand, using AI to understand the bias that's already in the data and in the decisions that get made using that data. And then also, well, I forget where I was going to the last of that. I'm sorry, it's actually late here. So, but yes, is it guiding policy exactly? That is maybe a question to ask the folks much higher than me in those that last slide that I had there.
But we'll bring that up again in the panel discussion and see if anyone has input on that. And there was one question in the chat. If everyone can please use the Q&A for questions, we can find them more easily. So the attendee Z5315, etc., asked, can you explain a bit more about explainability of models looks like? I'm particularly interested in this. What do you need to be able to do to explain to a clinician or to a patient?
Yeah, and the difference between interpretability and explainability, right? So interpretability being like, do we understand what parameters were important and what pushed the model in the direction that it, why did it do what it did? Versus explainability, which is sort of explaining the answer that it came up with. And I think that probably came up during the description of maybe Ziad Obermar's work there or whatever, where one of the reasons that to highlight that work where we show that there's bias in some of those algorithms is that if you don't sort of know the answer or know how to interpret the answer, the models can really lead you astray, right? They will find an answer. Models will create a correlation, or they will create categories, and without sort of having a context around that and being able to explain it, we could be led astray. But also, I think the simple answer maybe to the question is clinicians are, and biologists for that matter, are sort of visual people, and they need to know why, and they just are not generally willing to accept black box solutions, even when the numbers are good.
Thanks. So Pat, if there are if anyone has any questions they would like to ask in person, please raise your hand. There's probably one last Q&A question here. It says, it's from Artem Key. I'm a computational materials scientist, but I want to shift to AI approaches in cancer research. And I think the upshot is that they would like to get experience in training and work with other researchers in AI. Is there a way to, how would you recommend to go through that, getting experience in AI and cancer research?
Yeah. I suppose it depends very much where you are and at what stage of your career you are. But I will say, it just as an amusing aside, one of the other sort of really up and coming areas that we've been seeing is in material science. And so this combination of material science being designed for ex vivo cancer models, for example, really, being able to sort of the build it to test it kind of models. And using AI to design the materials, to design the models is a really interesting combination. We have a program around tissue engineered cancer models that is an international group and has a number of programs. I suppose, I don't know if I put my email in there or not, but people can reach out to me and I can connect you up with these existing programs. There are often collaborative opportunities with some of these big programs where we give supplements to the projects themselves to collaborate more broadly, particularly across fields like that, and bring in new expertise.
So it looks like for a material scientist, there's lots of opportunity.
Yeah, it's an exciting space.
Yeah. So if there appear to be no more questions there, thanks very much, Jennifer, and we look forward to seeing you again at the end of the session.
Right, thank you.